Today, I want to tell you about some progress that's going on. And I really got myself in kind of deep on this one because there's so much information. I've just been overwhelmed. Now, that's really a good thing because that means a lot is happening. So I'm going to share quite a bit of that with you. But I wanted to just review this picture because it, to me, summarizes everything. Particularly right before last summer, we were over here, slogging along, thinking everything is going so slowly. We are never going to be able to solve this problem. We are in deep trouble. And then all of a sudden, whoop, we're over here, and things start to take off. And I'll describe where we are on this curve now. But the idea is that progress is not following a linear pathway. It's going up this S curve, okay? And that means things are going to start to happen really fast. So I want to give a little outline because we're going to be covering a lot of ground. First, I want to review very quickly the whole idea about rapid change and tipping points. I'll talk about progress being made on the energy transition from fossil fuels to renewables, clean renewables. And this is mostly now wind and solar. And then I'll deal with some barriers and problems with this energy transition. So I'll be focusing today mostly on, this is emissions by sector, the two highest emitting sectors, power and transport. I don't know that much about industrial. I'll tell a little bit about buildings. And in the last two webinars, I'll talk more about agriculture. After I review a little bit about barriers, I'll talk about some really good ideas that I think are so innovative and have captured my imagination for solutions. And then I'll tell you a little bit, a sort of random grab bag of progress that is being made currently in the States. And at the end, I'll address this question: what can we do? How can we keep this crucial work on track? Okay, so just to review here, I really love this little cartoon. Here's this guy, plodding along, maybe he's in college or a teenager. My life is so predictable. Everything's going so slowly. He thinks he's going to end up over here somewhere in the future, but actually he or she ends up here because stuff starts to really happen fast. Our perception is that everything is moving at a linear, so that means sort of constant pace, constant rate. The reality is that many processes aren't linear, they're multiplicative. And so they build upon one another, and before you know it, you're zooming off on a curve instead of on this straight line. So this is a picture of the famous, at least to me, famous among the 200 people who care about it. That's what we used to say in my lab. This is a picture of the S curve. And the idea about the S curve is that, again, at the very beginning, it seems linear. And so people think we're not getting anywhere because they project into the future and they say, look, we're only going to be up here at 13% or whatever after all this long time, okay? But what actually happens is, as I said, the change follows this curved path, okay? And you get what I call the S curve surprise factor. That means, you weren't following this curve. If you follow this curve, you would be over here at 13% of, let's say this is solar, 13% of market share. But instead, at that time, because the system is following the S curve, you're at 50%, okay? So when you have this sort of non-linear change, it takes the same amount of time to go from, again, this is market share, it could be something else, to 0.2%, okay, to 5%. That takes the same amount of time as to go from 5% to 50%, okay? That's the miracle of non-linear growth, okay? So the energy transition, that is changing from fossil fuels to renewables, is on the S curve. And so it's behaving according to the rules that govern change along this curve. Other things on the S curve are EV adoption, electric vehicle adoption, electrification of buildings, manufacturing, industry, et cetera. And also probably climate action is curvilinear because people talk to other people and we get a sort of multiplicative effect. I talked about that a little bit last year. Okay, so what causes new technology to spread exponentially or on this S-curve? Well, there's some very important positive feedbacks, okay, and I'll explain that a little bit more down here. The first one is the so-called learning rate. Now, that's a sort of really geeky term that just means, this is a graph for the price of solar modules, okay, and this is how much capacity there was installed, okay. The price of solar modules starting at 1976, it was $100. I'm sorry, $100. I think it's per watt. Now I'm going to get my units wrong, but anyway, it was high cost. And then as time went on, the cost dropped. And this is on a log scale, so really it's a sort of curve. But you don't need, if you're not a sort of math geek, you don't need to know that. The idea of the learning rate is it is defined as the amount the price drops with each doubling of deployment. Okay, the amount the price drops. So when a technology is on a learning curve, the price goes down on this line if you have a log scale. Okay, so the learning rate for solar is 20.2%. That means the price of solar has dropped 20% every time the amount of solar out there doubles, okay? And that means the price is just dropping really fast. So you can see from 1976 to 2019, the price has gone down. I'll show you another picture of this, like 90%. The learning rate for wind is a little less, 15%, okay? Still really great. So the result of this is this picture. I'll just read the caption. Technologies that become cheaper with increasing production enter a, quote, virtuous cycle. I love that term because it just connotes all things good. More deployment, prices fall, that becomes more competitive in new markets, demand increases, so there's more deployment. So this is a positive feedback loop. When you have a high learning rate and the price drops, that increases deployment. Okay, so prices are dropping and they become more competitive, demand increases, more deployment. Incentives, like what we have gotten from the Inflation Reduction Act, has the same impact. So a high learning rate like this, which means price drops, is really dropping exponentially, and incentives put you on this positive feedback, okay? So that you just get more as things get cheaper. Another agent of positive feedback, as I said, is incentives from Ira and Bill, who really, are our best friends right now. Ira stands for Inflation Reduction Act. Bill stands for Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but they've got Bill on here, okay. Ira and Bill. IRA has $260 billion for the energy transition that was passed last August. The bipartisan infrastructure bill passed the year before, $80 billion. So they're cutting emissions from the major sectors that I showed earlier. And the size of the circle is the size of the investment made in each of these. So $128 billion is going to go for wind, solar, and storage. That means battery tax credits, okay? Manufacturing tax credits for stuff like heat pumps, $37 billion. Residential efficiency improvement, $14 billion. Energy improvements, more, okay? Bill is the bipartisan infrastructure bill is doing some of the same things, okay? They're doing grid enhancement. They're also doing electric vehicles, charging infrastructure, et cetera. And all those are really good things. So the incentives for manufacturing and purchase of clean energy, which are 10 years, are going to boost production, create up to 1.3 billion jobs, okay, really good paying jobs, reduce costs of clean energy, and of course, increase sales and get on that virtuous cycle of progress. The residential rebates are going to increase installations, and as that of clean energy and also electrified homes, like people installing heat pumps and induction ranges and whatnot. And as that happens and people's neighbors see what's going on, This changes social norms, and this also contributes to positive feedback. So a virtuous cycle of progress. Now, there are what I think are a few giveaways in these two bills, two special interests, and I'll just call these out. We'll talk about what I think are not real climate solutions next time. This is carbon capture and underground storage tax credit, 3.2 billion, clean hydrogen tax credit. Clean hydrogen is good, but most hydrogen is not going to be clean, at least initially. So the fossil fuel companies are really getting into hydrogen. Biofuels incentive, that's like growing corn for ethanol, which is actually a really bad idea. Over here is more incentives for carbon capture and storage demonstration and infrastructure, 11 billions, hydrogen hubs and demonstration, et cetera. Plugging orphan wells, they've started to disperse some of this money, and it's really important because these orphan oil and gas wells are leaking out a lot of methane and also water pollution. So these are really, really good things, and they are just coming. I get announcements in my email every day about one or more of these things, a grant program for this or for that, funded by these two laws. So this is just huge. Okay. This makes me feel so optimistic because, I was over there parked on that, part of the S curve where it seemed like nothing was happening. And now I feel like, and I'm going to tell you about this today, I feel like we're really making some tangible headway. Okay. One thing about renewables, again, wind and solar and electrification, is they boost efficiency, which eases the energy transition. It maybe is a little bit of a sort of a slippery concept, but less overall energy is needed if we power everything with wind and solar and we drive everything with electricity. And I showed these slides last year, but I just want to review. Solar as a primary energy source is much more efficient than coal. Why is that? Okay, so here's a coal-fired power plant. When they burn coal to make electricity, 67% of it goes up the stacks as heat, okay? Wasted. It's not contributing to our electricity. 33% goes to the plugs, okay? So 2/3 of it is wasted. Even worse is your car. When you put gas in your car, 70 to 88% of that, the energy in the gas is lost as heat. You go up to the engine compartment, it's hot. You put your hand behind the tailpipe, the exhaust is hot. You're losing a lot of heat. That's energy that had to be obtained and sort of is stored in the gasoline, but we never get to use it, okay? It's only 12 to 30% of the energy in the gas goes to your car. So that's why an electric vehicle is 400%, that means 4 times more efficient than an internal combustion engine, okay? When we don't waste all this energy, we only need to actually get about 20 to 30% as much energy as we had to acquire in fossil fuels, okay? That all the mining, the whatever, all the human rights problems with fossil fuel exploration and drilling and all the pollution and the biodiversity loss, et cetera, 70 to 80% of that was wasted. We never got to use it. So clean renewables and electrification, so we're not, burning stuff all the time to power everything. When we run it off electricity, much more efficient, okay? So that's good. Now, the dynamics of the renewable revolution. I first want to give my thanks to the Rocky Mountain Institute. Now, some of you who maybe are about my age might know Amory Lovins, and he, a big figure in conservation for many, many years, really smart guy, started the Rocky Mountain Institute, hired hugely smart people to work there. And I've been reading everything that they have on the energy transition, and it's a lot. I talked about some of it last year, peaking, et cetera. But these figures are from RMI, is Rocky Mountain Institute. And when I send you the PDF with the slides, all these links will be hot. So you can just go to your PDF and click and sign up for their newsletter or go to the report where I got these pictures. Okay, as costs keep dropping, here we are. This is a 2021. Okay, this is going forward to 2050, continue dropping. EV batteries continue dropping. Deployment keeps rising. Okay, so these are different timescales, but the idea is basically the same. Okay, this again is from Rocky Mountain Institute. According to their data, there's two ways of looking at it. And we're going to follow the increase of heat pumps, solar and wind, and electric vehicles. This is market share of clean energy sales. In other words, what fraction of home heating installations are heat pumps? In 2011, 5%. In 2021, 10%. Forecast 25% in 2030. So these are, heat pumps are spreading fast, but they're starting at a very low level. Okay. Solar and wind, 2011, 28% of new energy was solar and wind. By 2030, 95% of new energy will be solar and wind. They're not going to be building any gas-fired power plants in 2030 because it is not going to be economical to do that. And that's going to, basically put a squash on that. Electric vehicles, 0% in 2011, 0% of new car sales were EVs in 2011, 9% in 2021, 40% or more in 2030. So this is them going up, sort of up the S curve. Okay, this is global deployment of clean energy. How much is the share of everything out there? Not just the share of what's being bought, but the share of everything out there. Heat pumps, 10% in 2021, 24% in 2030. EVs, 1% to 16%, solar and wind, 2021, 10%, 2030, 30%. So these are starting to go on that curved path, which is faster than linear. Okay. And other pictures are, can show it to us in a different way. We can see that, in fact, solar additions are starting to go up the S curve. Okay, so here's the S curve. Okay, solar additions. This is the International Energy Agency sort of marker for where we need to be for net zero in the future. And you can see that the solar is going right along that projected path. The graph on the right shows the increases in market share, increase of electric vehicles. Okay. From flat. Everybody who had an EV back in 2017 was like feeling like, well, when are we going to have another one in the neighborhood? Now things are starting to really increase. Internal combustion engines decreasing. Okay, there's only so many people who are going to have cars. If more people have EVs, fewer people have internal combustion engines. So this is observed. Here's 2023. This is projected. What they're projecting is zooming up that S curve, these guys crashing down, okay? We are probably almost certainly beyond the tipping point for both solar and EVs. Okay, now, according to the Rocky Mountain Institute, with current technology, that is, we already know how to do these things, we can replace 70% of fossil fuel use. In other words, we've got the tools already to get rid of most of fossil fuel use. And so here's fossil fuel use, 100%. Renewable power, wind and solar, take away 34% of the need or the use of fossil fuels. Electric vehicles, so they decarbonize power. Electric vehicles decarbonize transport. They take away 18% of the market. They will take away 18% or could take away 18% of the market share of fossil fuels. Heat pumps can eat away into another 17% of what now is being powered by fossil fuels. So in other words, 70%, that's what this pretty much adds up to. 70% of fossil fuel demand is under threat from a renewable solution right now. That makes me so happy, okay? Now, it doesn't mean we're at this yet, okay? People still need to buy these things and we need to install all this power. But this is getting to that place on that S curve where it's inevitable, okay? That's what I'm looking for. So we will, here's hydrogen and other things, harder to solve sectors like airplanes, okay? This is the rest, the other 30%. And according to the Rocky Mountain Institute folks, they're pretty sure that we're going to know what to do and be able to essentially get rid of the rest of the fossil fuels in these sectors by 2030. We'll have the solutions for by 2030. Okay, so this is a stylized curve, but the idea is that on these S curves, because what you've got is an old technology that people are using, and it's being replaced by new technology. So when a new technology starts to spread really fast, going up that S curve, okay, here we are, new technology, and we're around here for, say, wind and solar, up, okay? As that happens, okay, we enter a plateau, okay? And the Rocky Mountain Institute is pretty sure we're on the plateau now. Now, the thing about the plateau is it's this time of disruption, okay? Everybody's in a big snit because stuff is happening and use of fossil fuels is going up and down and people don't know what's going on and everybody feels more or less unhappy. Some things speed up the shift, that is they sort of shorten the plateau. The Ukraine war raised fossil gas or methane gas prices, and that got a lot of people in Europe, you know, on the heat pump track, okay? And this has really hurt the natural gas industry. Incentives from IRA and Bill, those two pieces of legislation I discussed, increase adoption of clean energy, that shortens the plateau, speeds the shift, and ongoing increases in efficiency speed things up. Other things slow the shift down. So this is why we get this sort of up and down, bumpy thing going on. The incumbents, that is the people who own the fossil fuel companies and shareholders and whatever people from those companies, they fight back. They are not going to go out without a fight. And that is going to contribute to our misery over the next few years, I can tell you. And political polarization, partially more than partially due to this, I think. Political polarization mutes public support. So people think, you know, they've got, you know, misinformation about wind and solar. And I'll show you a little bit of that later. So there's this sort of tension between things that speed up the decline of fossil fuels, things that slow it down. So you get this kind of bumpy thing going on. But eventually, once you reach that tipping point, this is pretty much inevitable. And so once you get to the peak, it's very unlikely that you're going to go back to fossil fuels. Okay, so that's the thinking. Now, this is the actual picture. Oh, shoot, I let this get cut off, but it doesn't matter. What I want to say in this part is the rate of this transition, replacement of the old by the new, is driven by the rise of the new, not the tenacity of the old. So the fossil fuel interests might be spewing disinformation. They might be doing this, they might be doing that. But it isn't going to help over the long run because the economics are going to be such that wind and solar are so cheap that nobody wants to buy electricity made by burning coal or made by burning natural gas. Once renewables pass the tipping point, their rapid spread and the increasing recognition of their benefits drive out fossil fuel. Okay. RMI think we are here. They think global fossil fuels peaked in 2019, and we're in a bumpy phase here. This is the future. So this is projected, but this is what's already happened. So they think fossil fuels peaked in 2019, and in their words, it's all over but the shouting. I'm looking forward to the shouting. Okay, other forecasters agree, even BP, okay, the big oil company. They agree that we've reached global peak fossil fuels. The international, so here's just some graphs of what these other folks have been saying. The International Energy Agency have a few different scenarios, but this is 2023 right here. This is the present. In all the scenarios, there's no increase in power from fossil fuels. There's a sort of plateau, long plateau, or a decrease. of different rates, but no increase, okay? Power from fossil fuels. I forgot to look up what DNV stands for. This is a picture from an RMI report, but here are all the different sources of power. Here's 2019, right? That little bump, and we go down. That was the pandemic and whatever. But after that, wind and solar are increasing, but all the other stuff, including all the fossil fuels, are going down. Okay. McKinsey, the big sort of think tank report people, they show the same thing. Fossil fuels is historical. This is projection. They call this the peak, but RMI says that's just a bump. Anyway, the point is it's going down, right? They recognize that, in fact, fossil fuels are not coming back, okay? And by 2030, they're on the steep decline. But I love this one the most. Even BP, this is 2019 here, this is 2025. Here are their projections. No increase, and could be a nice sharp decrease, okay? And so they call this new momentum. If somehow they can convince people to keep buying fossil fuels, unlikely, but there's no increase. So to me, this sort of consonance of these projections is very, very encouraging. This is not the first time we've seen these technology replacements, and RMI has these great graphs showing cast iron to steel. There it is. Steel comes up, cast iron crashes down. Sailing ships to steamships. Okay, steamships go up, sailing ships go down. Cars to horses. Horses are going along great. Cars come up, horses go down. Lighting, gas to electricity. This is gas. Okay, everything's going good. People are lighting their houses with gas. Electricity comes up, boom. Steam to electricity for power, boom. Heat, coal to gas, boom. Okay, this is now in more or less recent times. And RMI includes these, what I think are hilarious statements from incumbents or people who were in the sort of the traditional technology at the time that the new technology replaced it. So when trains came along, this guy was a professor at University College London in 1830. He says, well, rail travel at high speed is not possible because the passengers, unable to breathe, would die of asphyxia. So this is the kind of disinformation or misinformation. Maybe this guy's not really trying to spew it, but this is the kind of stuff people say. Telephones, Western Union to Bell when turning down his patents, okay? What use could this company make of an electrical toy like that? Okay, the phone. Electricity, Committee of the British Parliament on Edison's work. Edison's ideas are unworthy of the attention of practical or scientific men. Well, people believe this because these guys are big muckety mucks, right? Oil, prospective drillers to Drake. Drill for oil? You mean drill into the ground and try to find oil? You're crazy. Cars, advice to Henry Ford's lawyer, 1910. The horse is here to stay, buddy, but the automobile is only a novelty, just a fad. Computing, Watson, chairman of IBM, 1943. I think there's a market for about 5 computers. So he happily ate his words, right? IBM really raked in after this. Renewables, lots of people in the fossil fuel companies and the industry and the lobbyists, blah, blah, blah. Lots of people are saying stuff like, it's too expensive, they're unreliable, wind and solar are not always available. They're spewing this stuff, which is really not right. And people are believing it, okay? But that's not gonna help. It didn't help these guys, okay? Might have slowed things down, but it did not help them in the end. Okay. Reading some of RMI's, Rocky Mountain Institute reports, I learned something, or sort of they transmitted an idea to me that I had not thought of, and I think is so terrific. There are certain structural attributes of renewables that totally change the game, okay? Because power from energy and also political power and profits are not centralized with renewables. So fossil fuels, they are geographically very limited. There's only a few countries in the world that have a ton of fossil fuels. Wind and solar, hey, everywhere. You have wind and sun everywhere. For fossil fuels, you continuously need to get new fuel. Okay, you need to drill for more oil. You need to mine for more coal. You've got to have new fuel because you burn it up. Wind and solar. Hey, once you put in the windmills or the solar panels, you don't need any fuel. It's free. Fossil fuels, low efficiency because of the thermal waste. Wind and solar, high efficiency. You generate those electrons with the wind turbine or the solar panel. You pump them right into your EV, very high efficiency. But these are the best. In fossil fuels, trillions of dollars go to oligarchs and people who are using that energy for power, okay? But hey, and they make zillions, I mean trillions. Trillions is an underestimate. I think zillions, okay? Wind and solar, hey, no super profits. Nobody, no autocrat, no dictator is going to control the wind and the sun. So nobody's making that kind of super amount of money. And they can't use it for political power because energy is distributed to everyone. I love that, okay? It's like, we don't need your stinking fossil fuels, buddy. So just go over in your corner and leave us alone. That's a little rude, but once the wind and solar infrastructure is built, the power is pretty much free, right? Because it's the wind and the sun. This comes from another RMI report, wind and solar potential as a multiple of total energy demand in the place, okay? So if you look at Africa, where right now they have very little electricity, and some places in South America, in sort of Middle Asia, part of Indonesia, there is so much sun there and so many places to build solar panels that it's super abundant, 1,000 times the energy demand. Abundant is 100 times the energy demand in the blue. Replete means 10 times the energy demand, okay? Still plenty of space to build out wind and solar in these places. And only a few places, some places in Europe, and geez, now I'm going to be ignorant and not be able to tell you what that is, but Japan, some of these places where they don't have a lot of land area, it might be a little tough, okay? But the rest of the world, it's not going to be tough to find places to put this stuff. And what I think is terrific is that it's going to be a revolution for people now who don't have power, okay? Who use so little power or don't have any. Wind and solar is going to provide abundant power to the 45% of Earth's people who now don't have any access at all, okay? This is an equity revolution. This is huge. It's going to improve education. It's going to improve people's prospects for the future. It's really great. Instead of a few countries owning all the natural gas, Russia owns the natural gas. And they're like, well, we're fighting with you guys, so we're not going to send the gas. Well, we don't have that anymore. They can't say we're fighting with you, so we're not going to let you use the sun. No, that's not going to work. This is good. Okay. Now, polls of Americans show broad support for climate action and renewables. This is from the Pew Research organization, and it's from April this year, April 23. 3/4 of Americans support a U.S. role in global efforts to address climate change. Okay, there it is, 75%. About 70% of Americans prioritize alternative energy development and carbon neutrality. This is the percent of U.S. adults who say the U.S. should prioritize expanding oil, coal, and natural gas production, 30%, versus prioritize renewables, 70%. The fraction who oppose the U.S. taking steps to become carbon neutral, 1/3. Who favor the U.S. taking steps to become carbon neutral, 70%. So this is good. It gets a little more complicated than this, though, unfortunately. I'm not going to show you all of this survey, but most Americans don't actually favor ending fossil fuel use. And if you look, here's all U.S. adults, only 30% say get rid of fossil fuels. But almost half of people 18 to 29 say we got to get rid of the fossil fuels. These guys know what they're talking about. And we're relying on them, okay? Old people like me, I'm over here, of course, but old people, not so much. Only 20% think we should get rid of fossil fuels, okay? What am I saying? This is phase out. This is phase out. 48% of young people, 20% of old people. Okay. So I got a little mixed up on the colors there for a second. So we are in so many ways going to be depending on the leadership of people who are in most cases younger than we are. All right, now let's talk about some barriers to this energy transition to clean renewable energy. But I want to start out with a barrier that I think is a fake, a false barrier. And that is land requirements for solar. So here's a big solar array on farmland, and here's a big solar array in the middle of a forest. I hope they didn't cut the forest down for this, but you never know. Some places they do cut the forest down. I don't understand. Okay, let me start up here. Some reports, like from the Princeton group, for example, and from the Nature Conservancy, they estimate that over 10 million acres will be needed to install solar. And that's if we just install it all in big arrays on the ground like this, mostly on farmland, okay? And so they, I forgot to look this up, but there's variable ways of trying to make this seem real to people, like it's going to require, you know, the states of X, Y, and Z, you know, to cover those states completely with solar panels. I mean, it makes it sound like it's impossible, okay? I know you've all seen this stuff. The Nature Conservancy, I don't understand why they're doing this, but they are promoting, they sort of spent a lot of time in this big report, figuring out the best sites to put solar arrays on farmland. I completely disagree with that. I think we need to stop putting solar arrays on farmland. Okay, now it can be useful for farmers, but it really, you know, kind of limits the growth of crops. Although, let me point out that since 70% of crops grown in the US are used to feed animals, if we move toward more of a plant-based diet, we will have a bunch more farmland opening up. But anyway, I still disagree with this point of view because everybody gets very freaked out about where are we going to find all the land to put the solar panels. There's plenty of spaces to put the solar panel, put solar arrays on industrial rooftops, warehouses, brownfields, that's like old contaminated sites, old coal-fired power plant locations where they've closed down the power plants, in parking lots, on carports, right, on reservoirs. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I was reading about a coal-fired power plant location where they have shut down the power plant. And now they're building out some big solar arrays, and they're making use of the fact that there are already power lines going to the power plant because, of course, it took the electricity generated by burning the coal out on those power lines. And so when they close down the coal-fired power plant and they build the solar, then they've got transmission wires to take that right to the centers of where people use it. We all notice this, right? That people, you know, usually when they're trying to solve a problem, come up with a solution that is familiar to them, that seems, you know, understandable within their worldview. And usually that's the easiest solution. And I would like for people to be, you know, stop just automatically going to the easiest solution and start, you know, saying, let's put these things on, you know, carports over parking lots, because that would reduce the urban heat island. It would keep everybody's car cooler. It would save a lot of fuel, you know, et cetera. But what's driving this is the solar developers, because it is a lot cheaper to put solar panels on the ground like this than to put it on carports or, you know, on a rooftop. Well, okay, so what? We still need to be able to do everything. And so don't compromise one thing we need to do, grow food, for another thing. Just go to a different solution. But, you know, if something's 10 cents cheaper, people want to do the cheaper route. That's where we need regulations. Okay, anyway, that's my rant about that. So let's talk about some real barriers to 100% clean renewable energy. Transmission lines. Because our nation is powered by these giant power plants, that send the power to to neighborhoods. There aren't a lot of really long transmission lines that go across the country. Okay, so I'm sorry, I couldn't improve this picture anymore, but these are existing high voltage lines, and a lot of them are very short. They just run around, between places. If you go out west, there's just a few, right? But here's where there's a lot of solar, but there's no transmission lines. So this is a picture from a recent article that I read showing that, in fact, 4 new long distance lines were just approved. They haven't been built yet. But the problem with transmission lines, I got ahead of myself. The problem with transmission lines is there are not enough of these high energy lines between the users and the areas with large wind and solar potential. There's no federal standards or regulations that govern how power lines are approved. It's all state and local. And so, we get the NIMBYs, not in my backyard, people saying, I don't want to look at that power line. I don't want that thing going by my house. And project transmission lines can be delayed for years by 1 or 2 landowners who just say, I don't want to have that. And because there's no, federal regulations, or there's no way of really getting over that, we don't have power lines. The other thing I read a lot about this week is that power lines, this is a problem in Texas, down here in Texas, where they've got a lot of wind in West Texas and a lot of people who want to use the power over here. The lines, because there are not enough of them, get so busy that it can't take all the power, okay? And so power gets dumped, and this is in Texas, it's the renewable power that gets dumped. And so windmills out there in West Texas are generating all this power, but it can't go anywhere because there's too much fossil fuel power in the power lines, okay? So that's the kind of stuff that happens. It's like, wait a minute, we ought to be able to figure this out. That doesn't, but Texas says, well, hey, we're not building any more power lines. So that prejudices the system against renewables. So here's the 4 new lines that were just approved, $13 billion worth of transmission. And later on, I'll talk about some good ideas, virtual power plants and photovoltaics, that's putting solar panels on water, that can reduce but not eliminate the need for long distance transmission. The other thing that reduces that need is building solar or wind on the site of defunct coal-fired, gas-fired power plants. Okay, other real barriers to 100% clean renewable energy. Minerals for batteries, EVs and storage. That's a big issue right now. They're hard to obtain because there are not very many places that have them. There are some human rights violations going on. But I will caution you, as terrible as these are, they are a drop in the bucket compared to the human rights violations that have gone on for decades to get fossil fuels, okay? So it kind of irks me, as you all know already, when I see, reputable papers like the Washington Post harping on and on about how we can't have EVs because of, there's not enough minerals. Well, okay, we're smart people. We can figure that out. We will develop recycling strategies. It's not that easy to recycle solar panels to get the minerals out, or it's not that hard to recycle batteries. They're working on that now. So anyway, we will develop recycling. Other supply chain problems with, we can't get enough of some of the things that we need. And that's why it's good news that some of these things, solar panels and batteries, are being built in various US states. Now, here's a problem. Solar panels and wind turbine blades. Right now, there's nothing to do with them when they reach the end of their life except put them in the landfill. So here's a big pile of wind turbine blades in a landfill. They're going to just shovel a bunch of dirt over them. That is obviously not going to work, okay? And so we need to recycle these things. And we're at that place where, oh, hey, we've got this need. Now go figure out how to solve it. We have plenty of brain power to solve these problems, but they're not solved yet. I have no doubt, though, that they will be solved. And because of IRA and Bill, those 2 landmark pieces of legislation, tons of money is flowing out there to people who are devising these solutions. Permitting processes. This is different from transmission. This is getting the permits to build the wind and solar and then to connect it to the grid, okay? These are terrible. They're tortuous. There's years of delay in these things. And again, that's because they represent a historical structure that were a few big power plants, not tons and tons of smaller distributed power. And so we don't have the system for that. But none of these problems is insoluble, okay? We're in that disruptive period where we don't know how to do everything, but we're pretty sure we can figure it out. I feel optimistic about that. Okay, so here's some progress. I just read maybe yesterday or no, this is from 2022, about solar funding programs from the Department of Energy. They're giving out a lot of grant money. Oh, sorry, these are 2023 grants. They're giving out a lot of grant money for recycling solar panels. In fact, they gave out 10 grants, 5 of them in 2023 focus on building solar panels so they can be recycled. Right now, there's laminates and stuff that is hard to get separated, and figuring out how to recover key minerals. So there's 8 million for these 10 grants. They're doling these things out in different sort of waves. So they've got 5 groups now working on this for a couple $1 million a piece. These are 2 companies that are working on recycling wind turbine blades. This is from 2021. Siemens, a big wind company, they launched a renewable turbine blade that can be, so the problem is you've got these plastics that make the blade, and the plastics have to be sort of returned to a virgin state so they can make a new blade. This one only uses mild acid, so I don't really know how terrible that is, but the first installation of these was late last year, so it's, you know, we're still early days. None of them have been recycled yet. Vestas, another wind company, this is recent from this year, says they've got a breakthrough for recyclable wind turbines that use chemical recycling. That's a very sort of fraught phrase that could mean a lot of anything, using a ton of chemicals that might not be all that great for the environment. But an epoxy resin is not that easy to break down, so, you know, that probably is fairly harsh. But I indicate these as progress because, you know, we're making a start on this, okay? There's going to be a process of, well, that's a little harsh, that's hurting the environment, whatever. It's bumpy. I would like to say that the glass is half full rather than half empty. I think we've solved more difficult problems than this a lot of times in the past. I mean, again, think of, you know, the car replacing the horse, et cetera. We've solved a lot of technical problems. Other real barriers to 100% clean renewable energy. And these are the ones that I think are really troubling. Disinformation and a ton of greenwashing from fossil fuel interests. Now, the next webinar in 3 weeks, I'll be talking about claims from fossil fuel interests, other special interests, about how great they are, how renewable they are, et cetera, and how many of those are true, which is not very many. But they're also spewing a ton of disinformation out there. Natural gas is a reliable fuel. Renewables are not reliable. Well, hey, in Texas, during both the cold and the heat of last week, there wasn't cold last week, but the heat of last week, gas-fired power plants went offline, okay? So fossil fuel plants often can't deal with cold or heat. What was still running? Wind and solar, okay? So that was in Texas. This kind of disinformation and greenwashing misinforms the public, and it reduces support for clean energy because people think, okay, hey, we don't need to take this experimental technology, renewables. We don't need to make a change. Part of these things this is part of the issue with carbon capture and storage. Hey, let's just burn those fossil fuels and then we'll catch the carbon coming out of the smokestacks, liquefy it, liquid carbon dioxide, and send it down a pipeline, and then we're going to bury it. I'll tell you all about this next time. But this feeds people's sort of inherent desire to keep things the same. I won't have to change what I'm doing if we just capture the carbon coming out of the power plant and ship it away somewhere. Yeah, right. That's going to work. I won't have to change. And people really don't want to change. Okay. The other thing the fossil fuel interests are doing is they are lobbying hard. We all know that. And it's really depressing to realize how much they own of our legislative process. This is really depressing. And this blocks the policy we need to have. So we get political polarization of lawmakers and the public, the culture wars, the so-called culture wars. I can barely even talk about it, okay? But this limits and blocks needed policy just as much as this does, okay? Because they feed into one another. Political polarization erodes public support because half the nation doesn't want to do anything. Some states are, and I'll talk about this later, are even passing anti-renewables laws, okay? All US adults, 54%, view climate change as a major threat. Almost 80% of Democrats, but only 23% of Republicans. This makes it really hard to get anything done, okay? And we need a public that is enthusiastic about change instead of fighting it, okay? And that is really, I don't know how to deal with that problem. That is a problem. Okay, social polarization. This is an interesting, another part of that Pew survey. The share of people who say that renewable energy would make the following better, have no impact, or worse. So when you ask people, what will renewable energy do to jobs in the energy sector? Democrats say increase, Republicans say it'll decrease them. It'll decrease them, okay? 30% say it'll increase, 40% say it'll decrease. 1/3 don't know. 20% of Democrats don't know. What will renewable energy do to prices to heat and cool homes? Half of Democrats say make it better, okay, reduce prices. 22% say make it worse, but 65% of Republicans say it's going to make it more expensive, okay? Not really true, but that's what they believe. What will renewable energy do to the frequency of extreme weather, which we are now having in spades? Democrats say it'll make it better. In other words, it'll reduce extreme weather because it's going to help solve climate change. 36% of Democrats don't know, though. That's kind of scary. 70% of Republicans don't know what the connection is between renewable energy and the frequency of extreme weather. That's pretty scary because when people don't connect the dots between the way we get our power and climate change, okay, if we burn fossil fuels, we have climate change. Burn fossil fuels for power and transport, we have climate change. A lot of the people in this country don't connect those dots. That is a problem. Okay. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to do a ton of great stuff for the country. It's going to save US households $60 billion in energy bill savings. So this is, I forgot to put the link on this, but I'll put the link on for the slides I send you. It's going to increase GDP by billions. It's going to add 580 gigawatts. This is a lot of clean and low carbon resources on the grid. It's going to prevent 2.9 billion tons of carbon emissions. That's a lot. That's a really good thing. And it's going to have a huge beneficial impact on health. A lot of people don't connect those dots either. It's going to deliver over $74 billion in health benefits by preventing premature deaths, preventing asthma attacks, and preventing law school and work days. But if we do not pass good policies in the Congress and in state houses, mostly in the Congress, without good policies to implement the Inflation Reduction Act, we will not realize these benefits. So it's a little bit precarious. The money is there, but the policies still need to be formulated to spend the money. Okay. The IRA is going to do a lot of great things for the building sector. I don't want to spend too much time on this. It'll be on the slides. Okay, sorry. I want you to remember that you can get paid to electrify your home with tax credits from the IRA. Rewiring America, the nonprofit, has all the details. You can go to their website. It's all there. Here's their big guidebook to going electric. Here's 2 other resources. Here's a a fact sheet from Energy Star about federal tax credits, and another really great fact sheet from Canaria Media on how to get the rebate. So you can look these up for yourself. Okay, let's get into the section of good ideas. Microgrids are not a new idea, but they're sort of a groundwork idea on which people are now building. A microgrid is a set of power sources, okay, renewable energy or batteries or generators or whatever, and loads. So a load is a building or something that uses power, okay? So power sources in the yellow, loads in the gray, microgrid controller in the middle, who is balancing all the use and the load. And here's a utility that's sending power to the microgrid. But the key thing about microgrids is you can disconnect from the utility. If there's like a storm and the BGE goes down and you're on a microgrid, you can just turn off BGE and use these sources of power, okay? Instead of basically getting in the big blackout. So microgrid controllers, they balance all of this, but power still only flows one way, okay? From the source into sort of to the load, okay? We don't have power flowing from the EVs to the microgrid, okay? It's all one way. But that changes with virtual power plants. They use distributed power. Distributed power is power at people's houses or power in buildings to help the grid. And the basic idea is customers get paid to let their devices be managed, okay? And there's two ways that your devices are managed. One is they are managed to reduce the amount of energy they use, reduce the load, or they can be managed to provide power to the grid. So there's a little key over here. Here are the things that go into a virtual power plant. Smart thermostats. If you have a smart thermostat, and BGE already has this program, they can ramp down your air conditioner to reduce the load so that they don't have to spend a bunch of money turning on a new power plant for 2 hours in the middle of the day. Okay, they can control your device. Smart water heaters, same thing. BGE, I think, used to do that at least. I don't think they do it anymore. Commercial building automation systems. If those are all tied, they're all wireless, they're all tied in. The aggregator or the person in control, this is like the microgrid controller, can sort of reduce the load by controlling these devices. Then there are sources of power, your electric vehicle battery sitting in your driveway, your rooftop solar PV, or batteries, your Tesla Powerwall or whatever batteries you have. These are sources of power. So what happens is the aggregator is sitting in the middle, sort of like the microgrid controller. The customer devices are managed by the aggregator when the power is needed. So the aggregator might, this is with customer permission and paying customers, they turn the thermostat so that up in the summer, okay, so that the air conditioning isn't used so much. They turn off your hot water heater. Hot water stays hot a long time. You can turn off the hot water heater in the middle of the day and save that power. And they control commercial buildings through their automation systems. Or they can suck power from EV batteries, other batteries, and take power from rooftop solar PV. So they're managed by the aggregator with permission. Then the aggregator either reduces demand or supplies extra powers to the grid. Okay, here's the grid. The power system is then operating at a lower cost, is more reliable, emissions drop, and additional infrastructure is avoided. You don't have to build new power plants if, in fact, you can reduce the amount of power that's needed or suck the power from residential EVs or other batteries and whatnot. The benefits that then get shared by everybody, the customers, the utility, the aggregator, and even society, because emissions are reduced, okay? So virtual power plants are really taking off now, and they can be just sort of composed of any combination of these different entities. Okay, I read a study, and here's the citation to that study, that showed that sort of the actual monetary benefits of having a virtual power plant. So the idea is, if you have a virtual power plant, you can control the load, or you can get the power from these distributed sources. You don't need to build new power plants or transmission lines. You don't need to build utility scale battery storage, because you have 1,000 EVs parked in driveways, and you can use the power stored in those batteries. EV batteries in virtual power plants could provide the same amount of power as fixed batteries. This is in the future, worth billions. Why do you need to have your EV fully charged up in your driveway all the time, okay, when you could share a little bit of that power with the grid and avoid all this infrastructure costs, okay? If you have a virtual power plant, you don't need to turn on those peaker plants, which are usually very inefficient and very expensive to cover peak load. You can cover the peak load with power or reduced load from the virtual power plant. So here's a model. This is a cost of providing 400 megawatts of what they call resource adequacy. This means extra ability to provide power when it's needed, like during the peak. So if you provide it with gas, it costs $42 million a year. This is just a model, okay, with realistic inputs. If you build batteries to cover that, okay, if you build utility scale batteries to cover that need, it's going to cost $28 billion. If you use a virtual power plant and control those distributed resources to manage the power, it costs like $2 million. Okay, so a 400 megawatt virtual power plant saves between $21 and $42 million a year. This is just for 400 megawatts. So the idea is this can save a lot of money. We don't need to build out all those batteries, because we're putting some of the batteries in cars. We don't need to have utility scale batteries that duplicate that. So using VPPs instead of traditional power assets reduces emission, improves health by reducing air pollution because you're not running that power plant. And this is interesting and important. It involves the community in its own power use. Now, we've all been sitting here as sort of power consumers, and BGE or whatever our utility is sends power to our house and we pay for it. Okay, that's pretty much it. If you're part of a virtual power plant, you're contributing to the power needs of your community and you're getting paid for it. I think that's very empowering. That gets people involved as part of the solution instead of just, hey, send me the power. So I like this also. Okay, then there are some real life examples. Some of these are from 2022, 2023. Some of them are a little earlier. Sunrun and BGE are collaborating on battery VPP. I think this is in California. Here's one that is being built, a virtual power plant being used to benefit an underprivileged neighborhood in Richmond, California. In Utah, thousands of homes feed the grid stored power. Again, this is mostly batteries. And here's another sort of battery thing. This is the question: can customers' batteries, thermostats, and EV chargers keep California's grid up and running? I think this is a really good idea, and there's no reason why it won't work very widely. This little star reminds me to say that when you get this, this is a really good sort of review of the whole thing, the whole idea of virtual power plants. Okay, photovoltaics, another really great idea. Here's a picture of a photovoltaic array. Solar panels are attached to a floating structure that is anchored to the bottom. Okay, and here it's connected, of course, to power. Here's a sort of a photovoltaic array in an unlikely source, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It's not named Fort Bragg anymore. They renamed it. But this is generating some large fraction of the power used on the base. And here it shows how the panels are attached to these floating structures. Here's a really good idea. Solar panels stretched over or installed over an irrigation canal in California. Okay, it's a great idea because it shades the irrigation canal, reduces evaporation. Wherever they install these, it reduces evaporation, which is super important. It solves the transmission line problem because very often reservoirs are located near cities or on hydropower sites, which already have transmission lines. It solves the land problem because no new land is needed because you're putting the panels on water that's already there. I forgot to put on here that it reduces evaporation. That's really important. Only 10% of reservoirs in hydropower areas need to be used. I didn't say this right. If you use 10% of these hydropower reservoirs, it would produce, to float panels, it would produce the same amount of energy as all the fossil fuel plants in the US, 10% of hydropower reservoir area. So in other words, you don't have to cover the whole reservoir. And mostly this is on reservoirs, not on lakes. But I really like the solar canal idea. Disadvantages. There can be some problems if there's a lot of fish or other aquatic life in these reservoirs. A lot of reservoirs are actually drained periodically, so that it's not a problem. But you get reduced light penetration. That can be a bonus because it slows down algal growth, but it can be a problem if there's other life in there. There's been some fear that chemicals could leach out of the solar panels into, say, drinking water reservoirs. This doesn't seem to be happening all that much. If a storm comes, it can pick these things up and toss them around, which is a problem. And in fact, in one place, I'm not saying it happened here in Fort Bragg, but in one place, the wind gets underneath them and it can pull them up and pile them up. And there was fire because of electrical malfunction. So you've got this electrical thing floating in water, which sort of inherently is kind of a problem. But again, there's nothing insoluble here. And I think this is a really great idea. Okay, we don't need farmland. We can put our solar panels in reservoirs. Okay, here's some state progress. Many states have committed themselves to 100% clean power, and here are the dates. And I thought it would be fun to just put a little star on here for any state where someone was signed up for this webinar. Okay, so there's 22 different states represented in the audience for this webinar, and here they are. The green states have all committed to 100% clean power, including DC. Here's Maryland, 100% clean power by 2032, and here's the other dates. But you've got to be certain to check what your state defines as clean power. Now, we've been struggling with this for quite a while, many years in Maryland, because Maryland now includes burning trash, waste to energy, burning trash in big incinerators as renewable power, I guess, because there's an unlimited supply of trash. But burning trash lets out a lot of pollutants into the air, PM 2.5, et cetera. Burning biomass is included by Maryland. Burning biomass is a very bad idea because we all know, if you had a little taste of the wildfire smoke, that burning wood puts a lot of particulates into the air and a lot of hazardous sort of volatile compounds. Very bad idea. Yet Maryland, we can't get this out of the so-called clean energy definition in Maryland. Hopefully, by the time we have 100%, we'll be able to get rid of that. Okay. All right. One thing that will reduce a lot of energy use is to have better building codes, more stringent building codes. And this just came out like yesterday, the day before, I just saw it, I think. States with better building codes can save a lot of money on energy use and reduce their emissions. And this is from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And they came up with this map showing states that could save 0 to 5% if they just increase their building codes. In other words, these states already have pretty good building codes, the blue states. Yeah, orange and yellow, they don't have very good building codes. If they improve those codes, they could save a ton of money, 35% on their energy costs. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is providing $225 million in grants over 5 years to all the states, any of the states who want to apply for it, to improve their building codes. That will reduce energy use and make that energy transition easier. IRA is providing another, this is $225 million, IRA $1 billion. So there's another good way money's being spent. Many states are working hard to boost EVs by having good EV planning, incentives, transportation efficiency, et cetera. This is again from American Council for Energy Efficient Economy. And the top states are shown here. I just wanted to show this because Maryland is number 10. We just eked into the top 10. New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Colorado, and California are the top 5. But states are trying to facilitate the infrastructure and the rules for EVs, and that's a good sign. Now, other great progress in the states. Most of the people signed up for this webinar live in Maryland, and if you live in Maryland and you have not heard, the Maryland Department of the Environment just released this report, Maryland's Climate Pathway, an analysis of actions the state can take to achieve our nation-leading greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So in 2021, the legislature passed the Climate Solutions Now Act, and the goals are reduce emissions 60% by 2031 and reach net zero by 2045. But that legislation did not have how are we going to do it, okay? So that was tossed back to the Maryland Department of the Environment, and they commissioned a study using people from University of Maryland and some other people to devise the pathway. How are we going to get there? And so this is a draft, and the Department of the Environment is taking comments on this draft this fall. So I encourage you, if you live in Maryland, to go to this website, get the document, read it, and submit comments so that Maryland Department of the Environment has your input on the strategies you think are best for reaching our goals. And this, again, is a hot link. You can find your form to submit your comments here, or there will be a bunch of listening sessions, et cetera. And so Maryland Department of the Environment is going to paw over all these comments and release their final strategy by December. I am going to cut short the discussion of these various cool things happening in the states. You can read these on the slides when you get them. Although I have to say, I really think it's great that this county is suing 14 coal and oil companies for damages from the big heat dome that killed a bunch of people in 2021. I told about in the newsletter, I talked about the Montana climate trial. There are a lot of climate lawsuits out there. 36 cities and counties and 7 states have also sued fossil fuel companies. The more people sue the fossil fuel companies, the more they have to pay, the worse off they are. So, okay. I'll just skip through these. Georgia's going to be a hotbed for new battery, solar, and EV factories, and they're training people. So they're training the people we need, which I think is very cool. And this is a cool thing happening in Austin, Texas. But then there's the rest of Texas. I mean, Texas has got some problems. As Texas cranks up the AC, congested transmission lines cause renewable power to go to waste. I told you about that already. Climate change made the Texas heat wave, which they're still having, more intense. Renewables soften the blow. There's 2 articles about that. And it was so interesting to see that the gas power plants went offline and the other fossil fuel power plants were doing bad. But what was continuing to go to keep the air conditioning on was wind and solar. And the question posed by this article is, clean energy is thriving, so why are state Republicans trying to stifle it? They're trying to actually pass laws to reduce the amount of wind and solar people can put up. I'm just going to skip that. A lot of people think that, mostly Republicans, and apologies to anybody who might be a Republican out there, 59% of Republicans think that renewable energy will make the grid less reliable. That is totally not the case, as has been shown in Texas. And Texas ranchers are raking in big bucks for allowing wind turbines on their property. Okay. I want to have a little bit of time for questions. This is the last slide. How can we ensure through our actions that the momentum that we've built up from all this great legislation continues? So here are my ideas, such as they are. First of all, keep learning. You came to this webinar, so you're interested in learning. Show up. That's 90% of any problem, right? Show up, ready to do the work. Write letters, talk to people in your network, at work, at your church, in your clubs, wherever you meet with people. Talk to them about this. Encourage your federal, state, and local representatives to vote for needed policies or call them out. Write letters, call their offices, say, I'm watching what you're doing. I want you to vote for X, Y, and Z. I don't want you to spread a bunch of misinformation. Okay, call them out. Vote out representatives that are obstructing needed policy and wasting time on culture wars. If they're sitting down there in Washington, D.C., wasting a bunch of time in hearings about nothing, instead of making important policy, call them out and then vote them out. Be aware of disinformation and learn how to recognize it. Stick with reliable and verifiable sources for your information. If somebody tells you something and they're not willing to provide the source where they learned that, and it's not a reliable source, it's like my friend said, or many people think, but they can't provide you the source. Hey, you know what? Don't believe it. Electrify your own home and demonstrate it and talk it up to your friends and neighbors. You know, if you got a heat pump and you like it, hey, say it. Answer their questions. They say to you, I heard that heat pumps X, Y, and Z. And you say, well, you know, mine's working really great or whatever. When all else fails, raise your voice and get out there with your friends and march to show people with your feet and your voice that you are watching and you care. So